Troughton, you have at least implied that there was interferences on the betting of the 340 race. Now, in your opinion, was that the case?
Yes.
And where did this interference take place?
In the tote forecast windows. It very soon became apparent that people were betting in a very strange way.
And when did you first become aware of this?
It was my main assistant in the main control room that first pointed out to me, my chief dividends calculator, Mr. Trevor. And he pointed out to me on the tote board that there didn't seem to be any money at all going on the 4 and 6 dogs either way.
What is the tote board, Mrs. Troughton?
Well, it's a large indicator board that shows the punters exactly how the betting's going. It's quite straightforward.
And you and your colleague could see this board?
We have a smaller version of it in the main control room where I work. Well, as I said, he pointed this out to me, and we both watched for a while, and though the other forecasts were climbing steadily, all the time we watched, there wasn't a flicker for the 4 and 6 dogs.
So what did you do?
I rang down to one of my booth supervisors to see if I could find out what was up, and it was very soon clear. Now, the first supervisor I talked to said that...
I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mrs. Troughton. But at what stage did you ring your supervisor?
Oh, it'd be about 3:30. Betting had been in progress for about 5 minutes after the finish of the 320 race, maybe 6 minutes.
I see. Thank you. Would you go on, please?
Yes, well, the first supervisor I talked to said that she was very glad that I rang.
Now, you are not allowed to tell us what you were told, Mrs. Troughton. But, as a result of what you were told, what did you do?
Well, I said I'd go down immediately.
Go on, please. Thank you.
So I went down to each of the booths in turn. I spent about 2 minutes in each, and in every one of them it was the same story. Oh, except in 2 instances. There were 2 windows where betting was going on normally, but of course they were crowded as all the punters overflowed onto them.
I wonder if you could be a little bit more precise, Mrs. Troughton. Exactly what did you see in these booths?
Well, I walked behind the row of sellers, about 5 or 6 in each booth, and not all the windows were open, it being the afternoon. I walked down behind the rows of sellers and watched over their shoulders, and, as I said, in every case it was the same. There was a man just standing there. None of the punters could get their money on.
And these men, were they betting?
Well, I suppose you could say they were betting.
But were they also doing anything that you might think was, well, playing for time?
Oh, absolutely. I'll give you one instance. Take unsold tickets. Now, normally, after a race like that one, you'd expect 20 or 30 unsolds, and that is tickets that the punters said wrong or the sellers got wrong, or for one reason or another, they've not been paid for, but they've been punched. Now, we have to keep a track of those for the auditors, and after that race, there were 220 unsolds. 220.
Can we be absolutely clear about the significance of these unsold tickets?
Yes, it's one of the ways they were using to hold things up.
Yes, but I mean, could you be absolutely explicit as to how they held up proceedings?
Well, a man would buy, say, 10 tickets on a forecast, say on the 1 and 2 dogs, 10 tickets on the 1 and 2 dogs, and then he'd look at the tickets and say, no, he hadn't said the 1 and 2 dogs, he'd said the 1 and 3 dogs. So she'd put them to one side, he wouldn't pay for them, they'd be unsold, and then she'd have to do the 1 and 3 dogs.
I see.
And there were 220 tickets of this nature?
Yes.
Thank you, Mrs. Troughton.
Mr. Ingrams.
Or... Mrs. Troughton.
Yes?
When you made your tour of inspection, you would have had to pass among the punters in order to reach the booths,
Yes.
would you not?
Yes.
Was it chaos? Was there pandemonium?
Well, there weren't all that many there, it being the afternoon, but there was a certain amount of shouting at the men blocking the queues.
Were there any fights?
I didn't see any fights.
People were not being violently prevented from
No,
betting?
there didn't appear to be any violence. People were bewildered more than anything.
I see. You said you spent a couple of minutes in each booth.
Yes.
How many booths did you visit?
Well, all the booths selling forecast tickets, that'd be about 6 on that afternoon.
And you spent a couple of minutes in each?
I didn't time it.
You evidently did not time it. With the greatest respect for your invaluable testimony, Mrs. Troughton, it would have meant that you made your last inspection over a minute after the 340 race had finished.
No, that is not the case. The 340 race didn't go off till 3:42.
Oh, I see, but, well, surely you would have had to get from one booth to another. That must have taken some time.
Well, maybe it was only a minute in each. It was enough.
1 minute in each booth with an average of 6 sellers must have meant that you only spent 7 or 8 seconds.
Well, it was long
checking
enough,
each.
whatever it was.
Was there no action you could take, Mrs. Troughton?
Not really.
Had you no ground staff, no security staff?
Yes, well, it wasn't a robbery. There was nothing illegal.
Men were merely betting?
No.
Which is, after all, what the tote is for?
It is, but they were stopping others.
Was there anything dishonest even in what they were doing?
I've told you that as far as we were concerned, there was nothing illegal.
May I be absolutely clear, Mrs. Troughton? Was there anything that you could describe as dishonest?
As far as the tote was concerned, it was not dishonest as such.
Exactly.
I must thank you very much, Mrs. Troughton, for shedding so much light on what was a rather obscure case. Your testimony was invaluable.
That concludes the case for the prosecution, my lord.
Thank you. Call your first witness, please, Mr. Ingram.
Lord, I call the defendant, William Broad.
Good luck, Billy. Look after them, lad.
Tell him what you think, Billy.
Do some steak.
What is your religion?
RC.
Take the testament in your right hand and read aloud the words on this card.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
You are William Broad of 12 Rodney Square, Fulchester?
Yep,
And you are managing director of the company Racing Services?
that's right.
Racing Services is what its name suggests?
Yeah, well, it's an umbrella term, isn't it? Covers all aspects of racing, dogs, horses, anything that'll race.
But not bookmaking.
God help us, no. Anything the other side of the fence.
Have you ever been associated with bookmaking?
Yeah, that's where I started.
And what was it that caused you to jump over the fence, as it were?
You mean why'd I go the other way?
Yes.
Well, can I be honest?
Please do, Mr. Broad.
Well, it was bent. It was that bent it disgusted me.
You surprise me, Mr. Broad. I would have expected you to have a very strong stomach.
You'd be absolutely right, my lord.
Mr. Broad, can you tell us about your first job that first brought you into contact with racing circles?
Certainly. Well, I come from London originally, and I started selling eels outside Dagenham Stadium. Then I started on the inside, and this really was on the inside. I was working for one of the biggest bookies in the country, if not the biggest, and I was going down the dog tracks every night, backing dogs for this bookies.
This bookmaker was backing dogs?
Yeah, and these dogs wasn't winning. Either they was stoomers or they was on ice. But they wasn't winning, and they wasn't meant to win. It was just a way of making a false favourite.
In what way would this be advantageous to a large bookmaker?
Well, in every way, my lord. You see, all the money he gets for the favourite goes on the wrong dog. Then you've got a springer. Well, everyone wants to get on a springer. It's more money for the bookie.
What is a springer, Mr. Broad?
Well, when the price comes tumbling down on a dog, all the doubles, trebles, accumulators with the favourite, well, they all end up beat, lost. And this is a funny thing. All the dogs that I was sent to back never did win. I don't know why or how they didn't know they were going to win. I had my own opinion about it. But anyway, there was nothing illegal in what they was doing.
And what was your next job after this?
My lord, I do not see the relevance of any of this testimony.
Mr. Ingram's?
I'm rather surprised at my learned friend's objection, my lord. It is the defence's case that there was nothing that could be fairly described as dishonest by any criteria that could be applied to the fields of gambling and bookmaking.
My lord, surely honesty is not a mutable concept to be altered according to context.
On the contrary, my lord, it would clearly be absurd to apply the same standards of morality in a monastery as in a purely commercial venture such as bookmaking.
Yes, I can allow that the jury should be alerted to the context in which we're engaged, but I would be very grateful, Mr. Ingrams, if you would come to the central point as soon as possible.
Very well, my lord, I shall do so now. Mr. Broad, did you go into the main offices of Off-Course Investors on the morning of May the 2nd?
Yeah, I did.
What happened?
What happened? Well, I went and had a bet.
To whom did you give your bet?
Silly Sam, the settler.
Did you not give your bet to Mr. Broad, to Mr. Charles?
Oh, yeah, but he came out afterwards.
You did not ask specifically to see Mr. Charles?
You're joking. I'd take the bypass to avoid him. Ask him, God help us. Do you know the only reason he came out? Because 2 days previous I'd lost about a score on a dog, and he was a bit pleased about that. He was having a bit of a gloat.
Mr. Charles has told us that he loves his customers.
Yeah, loves their money.
Do you feel that he extends that love to you?
Well, love me? Well, Ronnie Charles? Ronnie Charles would bring back hanging just for me.
He dislikes you?
He hates me.
Mr. Broad, after you left Mr. Charles's premises, where did you go?
Oh, I drove down to London, picked up a couple of mates in Camden Town.
And who were these people?
Oh, there was Dead Body, The Ghost and Bunter. Then we all went down the stadium together.
Did you meet anyone you knew when you reached the stadium?
Yeah, I did, as it happens.
Who did you meet there?
Well, there was a geezer I knew a bit called Monaghan, and another geezer, McGinty, and about a dozen of their mates. All paddies, Irishmen.
Had you arranged to meet them there?
Well, I wouldn't say arranged. I'd sort of seen them in the pub, the Mother Redcap, and we'd said, sort of, see you there sort of thing, if you can make it sort of thing. But before you go into all this, what you've got to say is, why was we going there?
Yes, I am coming to that.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you. We was going there for one reason alone, and that was to get a good price for that forecast.
Now, when you say to get a good price, what exactly do you mean?
Well, decent odds. Simple as that.
Could you not have relied upon the odds that would have been declared?
Well, of course, I could have relied on the declared odds, but I'd have been a bit of a mug, though, wouldn't I? I mean, it's just me against the bookies, the legalised mafia. There's just me and those two dogs against that lot. I mean, one of us has got to use our loaf, and I could hardly rely on the two dogs, could I? I mean, they've got brains about that big, smaller than Ronnie's. I'll tell you one thing, though. I'd worked out that forecast and I'd put my wedge on it. And I was blowed if I was going to take tuppence for me trouble.